everybody, I'm Russ. Hey, I'm happy you guys are here. So, just to catch you guys up to speed, some of you have been here. We've lost some people forever because of the dating advice I've given, but some of you guys are here for the first time, and we're gonna be talking about singleness today. Yeah, let's go. So, just as I'm just getting this out there. I know I've said it before, but if you've never been here before, I've been married since I was 22. So yeah, it's great, but at the same time, I don't really have any experience with singleness. And so what I researched is what I'm gonna show you today. And our theme throughout this last couple weeks, when it comes to dating, marriage, and singleness, we've talked about honoring God first. So I'm gonna talk about what I've discovered diving into the world of singleness this last week and how you could possibly honor God first in your singleness. All right, can you guys see my eyes, by the way? I don't think I've ever worn a hat up here before. I just wanna make sure I don't look like Batman, like scaring you guys while I'm saying serious things. We're good? Thanks, Jocelyn. So, quick recap. The primary role of Sanctuary is not to get you a date. After last week, you guys could have had this misconception maybe because I made it seem like it was, that the primary role of Sanctuary is to get you a date. It's not. The primary role of Sanctuary is to honor God first, just like our series has been going through. And we honor God because he is worthy. If he is our greatest love, then we should honor and worship and love him the way he wants to be honored, worshiped, and loved. And he has these requirements for us. We were talking about that the last couple weeks, about how he requires us to love him, and so we love him that way. And using a little bit of hindsight, right? I've talked about hindsight a couple times. Hindsight is 20/20. That's like a classic thing people say. You have this experience, like this gained experience and wisdom. You can look back at last week, and maybe you realize you made some mistakes, right? None of you guys, just me. Guys, in hindsight, let me give you an extra piece of wisdom, all right? Last week, I ended by saying, guys, you need to ask girls out on dates. And then I said, girls, you need to say yes. I gave other pieces of wisdom, but not everybody listened to those after I said those things. So let me reiterate this. Guys, if you're asking out girls like 10 times a day, that wasn't the purpose of last week. Even if you're asking out girls maybe once a week, that might be too much for you. All right? When you come here, the goal isn't just to ask girls out on dates. It's to honor God first. But if you see someone that you're interested in, you see a woman, you're like, I would like to get to know her better. You could go ask her on a date. It's not a requirement, but you can. And if you're gonna wanna get to know her better, maybe go on like a group date or go to a group outing, or if you're really brave, you ask her out on a date with specific intentions that we talked about and plans. Like, do you wanna go to Colony Grill after Sanctuary? And when you go on a date, like you ask a girl on a date to Colony Grill after Sanctuary, on a date, if you ask her, you don't need to plan to get married, okay? Because it's common in Christian circles to say, date to get married. The first date isn't to get married. The first date is to get to know each other. And then the first couple of dates, because you don't even know each other's middle names yet, right? Some of you guys might not even know the last name of the person that you ask, or you forget their name after you ask them out to dinner. And then you're like trying to play it off for the whole time. Then you keep seeing them at Sanctuary. You're like, we went on a couple of dates. I didn't know what that person's name is. So the goal isn't to fall in love and have some sort of romantic thing. Maybe it's just to get to know each other better, and that's a victory. All right, great date. You got to know each other better. You solidified your friendship. Now you know you're going to be friends. Romance doesn't need to happen for it to be a date. It's a good idea, though, when you start to have these feelings come up and you're going to enter a relationship, you guys become girlfriend, boyfriend. Become girlfriend, boyfriend to marry, okay? Otherwise, you're just wasting the person's time. There's somebody else that they could be dating to marry and they'd have a wonderful marriage with, right? So don't waste their time. If you're just there for fun, go find somewhere else, all right? All right, ladies, I didn't talk to you yet. You guys were getting hyped last week. And then I had to talk to you guys. You guys were always coming. You knew you were coming next. I don't know if that was you, Jocelyn. I'm sorry. I was looking right at you. You're great. We're friends. Some of you ladies may have been scared about the consequences of last week. I told guys to ask you out on dates, and I told you to say yes. I just want to let you guys know that men always had the ability to ask you out on dates. So I didn't expect some of this tidal wave of guys going out. There's a pandemic of guys going out in sanctuary. You want to go on a date? You want to go on a date? Specific intentions? Colony Grill after this, right? I didn't think it was going to be like the Wizard of Oz. It was going to be a tornado of guys sucking you up into their sphere, being like, date, 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 like the seagulls from Finding Nemo, right? I didn't expect that to happen. And if that did happen, I would be the best preacher in the world because I had so much retention. If one person, this is what we say in the church, if I made a difference in one person's life, right? That's the goal, making a difference in one person. If one guy asked a girl out on a date, and I set that up so I automatically won, right? So, girls, women, I don't think that you're gonna get asked out on a whirlwind of dates, but if you happen to get asked out 5 times at Sanctuary, come see Sanctuary staff. We'll help you set up some boundaries and we'll protect you, okay? I'm being serious, that's not a joke. Now that we've recapped from last week, honoring God first, that is our goal. And then everything else is number 2, if we're making a priority list. Number 1, honoring God first. Number 2 is way down here, and then the rest of the list begins because there needs to be that much separation between 1 and 2 because honoring God first is that important. All right, let's get into this week. So I've been talking to Gen Z a lot because a lot of you are Gen Z, but Gen Z, I'm talking about you and we'll say young millennials. Whenever I say Gen Z, hear in your head, Gen Z and young millennials, because they're pretty mixed. So the way the generational thing goes, what I've learned in my deep dive into generations and dating and singleness and marriage, is that the current generation always wants what their parents' generation didn't have. So in this case, Gen Z started really similar to the builder generation, which was my grandma's generation, is their parents didn't have financial stability. My grandma's generation, the builders, she was born into the Great Depression. So she saw how her parents moved from place to place. They never had a home that they were raised in for one time. They were always moving. Money was always up in the air. Her dad would start businesses and they'd collapse. Gen Z grew up in the aftermath of the 2008 recession. And then that was when you were a kid. And when you grew up, you started getting into college. Maybe you just graduated or you're in the middle of college, and then all of a sudden, a global pandemic happens. None of this stuff is planned and is outside of your control, and you saw how finances and jobs were all over the place. So the current generation always wants what their parents' generation didn't have, and in this case, it's financial stability. And so dating and love for many Gen Zers took a backseat to job prospects and financial stability. In the previous generations, this is where you guys differentiate as well. They were influenced by those who were directly, geographically around them. And you guys have more people speaking into your life on a consistent basis than any generation who's ever come before. You guys are a force to be reckoned with in the kingdom of God. And if the enemy wanted to target a generation, of course he would target you. And the reason being is because from your bedroom, in your pajamas, you could change the worldview of millions of people on your phone from many, many countries. If I were gonna take the role of the enemy and try to throw you guys off, throw off the most impactful generation the world has ever seen for the kingdom of God, I would do what I could to make you feel alone, unworthy, undesirable, and unlovable. And I think that's a lie that's actually working among Gen Zers and young millennials. A lie that Gen Xers believed, and people like me, like the older millennials, we fell for this rat race of being behind what our friends had. They have the boats and the house and the car because they pursued it. That's the rat race they were in. Keeping up with the Joneses, always trying to get the possessions. I think the rat race of Gen Zers is relational. That you're trying to fight to catch up for all the relationships that you should have had, that you're failing because you aren't married or you're not in a committed relationship yet. And you'll finally be fulfilled if you could just fall in love and get married. I don't know if any of this is hitting home with you guys. But luckily, I found this really great statistic. There are 2 billion Gen Zers. Many of you are single. Many Gen Zers are single, which is great news, right? It takes the pressure off. And the good news is that Gen Zers will always be your age. You're not gonna reach a point where you're like, oh man, I'm too old. All those Gen Zers are 15, right? 18. They're gonna grow up with you. 2 billion of them, lots of singles. There's hope. And as Christ followers, a relationship with another person isn't our highest priority. As a Christ follower, our highest priority in everything we do is to honor God first. So I wanna take a look at some passages and get some helpful wisdom as how we could honor God first in singleness. And this applies to everybody as well, but this is specifically targeted at singles. And I wanna go throw it back to last week. We looked at this long Romans 12 passage that we referred to a bunch of times, but this two particular verses, 9 and 10, I wanna read tonight when it comes to singleness. Here we go. Don't just pretend to love others. Really love them. Hate what is wrong, hold tightly to what is good, love each other with genuine affection, and take delight in honoring each other. That's Romans 12. Oops. So I'm gonna start off with the least fun point out of my 3 points. It's a bit of a warning, and this is the point. We honor God when we're cautious in our friendships with the opposite sex. We honor God when we are cautious in our friendships with the opposite sex, even Christ followers, even other Christ followers. So this applies to singles, people who are dating, and people who are in married relationships. We need to be cautious, otherwise we could unintentionally enter an emotional dating relationship with someone. Though you may have put off dating and love on the back burner for your pursuit of finances or education or job prospects or stability, it doesn't mean you aren't in an emotional dating relationship. There are single people in this room right now. You have no idea. You're actually in an emotional dating relationship. Some of you aren't single, and you have no idea. Let me explain it. So these aren't dating relationships like you would just initially think of. If they were, you'd already realize you were in them. C.S. Lewis describes a couple different Greek words for love. In English, we have one word for love, and it's what? Love, all right? We're kind of lame. But in the Greek, there's a whole bunch of different words for love. And C.S. Lewis, great author, describes these 2 different ones, eros and philos, as images. He says the images are like this. Eros is 2 people looking at each other, and philos is 2 people looking at a common goal. Eros is what you think of with a normal romantic dating relationship. They're looking at each other. You know, romance is in the air, their lips are like puckering, they're like, ooh, they're probably about to kiss, right? You can see that they're love in their eyes, they're staring at each other, there's tension in the air. That's a classic romantic relationship. They're obviously in a relationship when you see 2 people like that. Philos still describes love, but as a friendship. And it describes 2 people staring at a common goal. And it starts out as friendship because that's what you wanted. You just wanted a friendship. But when the friendship is with the opposite sex, it could quickly turn into a romantic relationship. It doesn't look outrightly romantic. Maybe you've seen this before. You have friends, guy and a girl, and they say they're just friends, but when you see them, you know both of them well enough to know that there's more. There's more there. Romance is in the air. Maybe one of them wasn't really looking for a relationship and the other one was. Maybe neither of them expected feelings to develop. But intentions don't have the final say over outcome. How often have you seen 2 people and one of them introduces them as, oh, this is my friend, we're just friends, and the other one deflates, right? Because there's something else there. They really want more. To give it like this good illustration, there's a lot of movies about this, with this kind of trope in it, where you throw in a bunch of people into one situation, they wouldn't normally get along, they'd usually butt heads, but they have this common goal that they're all working towards. And all of a sudden they start becoming friends. They start liking each other. They start sacrificing for each other and going out of their way to serve one another. My favorite example of this recently, I know it's kind of old at this point, but the new Jumanji movies. I don't know, has anybody seen the new Jumanji movies? I think they're hilarious with Jack Black and The Rock and Kevin Hart. And so these 5 kids, 1 and then 4, spoiler alert, get thrown into this video game, not the board game from the 90s, and they have to survive. And out of the 5 of them, as they're working to survive, two different couples start to emerge. And this is a group that wouldn't normally get along. They wouldn't normally talk to each other. They wouldn't normally be friends. Only one of them ends up in a non-romantic relationship at the end of the movie. Romantic feelings develop as you move towards a common goal. Even if it just meant you just meant to be friends with one another, it doesn't take much to have these Eros-type feelings start to emerge. You naturally grow closer together when you're working towards a goal. You need to be conscious of this in your friendships with the opposite sex. And if, just a practical thing, if you're sharing things with your lady friends, guys, that you're not sharing with your guy friends, or maybe you're sharing at the same level as your guy friends, you need to stop. Those are dangerous waters. Because you're being vulnerable, and that's what people do in relationships. Some of you have been doing that for a long time, and you're stringing someone along without realizing it. This happens in Christian circles too, because we're moving towards the common goal of pursuing Jesus. And in Christian circles, we can end up in these small groups where we feel safe to share vulnerable things with one another. And if you're sharing vulnerable things about yourself with someone of the opposite sex and asking them for prayer, you need to stop. I know that sounds counterintuitive from a church perspective. But this is the type of stuff you need to bring to your guy friends if you're a guy, and your women friends if you're a woman, because this is actually what married people do. Married people are vulnerable in front of each other, and then they share each other's burdens and pray, and you're just friends. The ultimate goal of a marriage is to pursue Jesus together and to become the best friends possible while doing it. So watch yourselves when you're being vulnerable with your friends. I was at a wedding where the bride wanted her best guy friend to be her maid of honor. They were gonna change the name, man of honor, I don't know. It ultimately got shut down by the parents because they were really old school. But what does that say about the relationship between the bride and the potential groom? It shows that the woman was essentially marrying a sex object. The better husband was the best friend, but she was attracted to this guy, and she wasn't as good of friends with this guy who was the better candidate for being a husband, because husband and wife, your goal of marriage is to become the best friends possible while pursuing Jesus. And this isn't just a danger for singles, it's a danger for married people as well. Married people need to be cautious of this with the work wife. I have Christian friends who have work wives. When you have a work wife, emotional affairs are on the table. If you have a work husband, emotional affairs are on the table. If you don't know what it is, don't worry, you're safe. But if you're like, man, I have a work husband, I have a work wife, we need to be cautious in our friendships with those of the opposite sex, and we honor each other when we set appropriate boundaries around our friendships. I want to define a best friend for you. I want to define the different attributes of a best friend, and I want you to see who comes to mind when I describe it. All right, so I want you to close your eyes. I'm not going to throw anything at you, I promise. It's going to help you imagine this better. So close your eyes. I'm going to define a best friend and see who pops into your mind. All right, it could be anybody. Hopefully it's your best friend. Your best friend is always there. They always listen. They're committed. They serve you. They're honest with you. They're honest about you. They're vulnerable with you. You're vulnerable with them. You're willing to hold nothing back. They're willing to hold nothing back. When they see you in all your vulnerability, they see even the messy parts, and they say, I love you. Open your eyes. If you just imagine someone of the opposite sex and you're not married, you need to make some discerning moves to either set up boundaries or make it official. If you have a best friend and you're a guy and it's a woman, and this is the person that came to your mind, you either take steps towards being in a relationship or you take steps to put boundaries around yourself. Reserve these friendships if you're a guy for guys, and women, reserve these relationships for other women. And stick up for these boundaries if you feel the friendship's getting too close. I made a quick list of boundaries. If you haven't heard of boundaries before, this isn't a completely exhaustive list. It's just a couple things I thought of. Keep everything out in the public. Don't meet in private. Hang out in groups. Don't go on dates, because that's confusing, right? It makes them think that you're in a romantic relationship. Watch the amount of information you're sharing with them. Take a break from physical touch. And this list isn't exhaustive, but what you should do is make it personal. Make it yourself and have a trusted friend come alongside you who's wise and discerning and take a look at what the list looks like. See what they say. We honor God when we're cautious in our friend groups with the opposite sex. We're going to take a look at another passage for our second point, 2 Corinthians 4, 16 through 18. Here we go. Therefore, do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. So the point I want to make here is we honor God when we set our focus on the eternal. Hindsight, keep going back to it. Hindsight's given me the opportunity to look at my past years with this well-earned wisdom of many, many experiences. I have deeper understanding. I've given myself grace, and I'm also outside of the emotional weight of the moment. This isn't true for like those memories that wake me up in the middle of the night from like high school where all of a sudden I was like, I can't believe I said that. But it's true across the board. Generally, I'm able to have grace with myself. So when I stand here at 33 and I look back at my time in high school, in hindsight, it's crazy what I ascribed worth and value to, and how many of those things didn't last. The amount of sleep I lost, the late nights of deep longing for obtaining what I wanted, for winning, the anxiety of succeeding, how badly I wanted this specific lacrosse stick, how badly I wanted these specific cleats. All the time I spent chasing one specific girl from 6th grade to 12th grade, and I know how that sounds. It's crazy looking back at that stuff, what I ascribed worth to. But the pain and the hurt I experienced at this point in my life, it was real, and it was intense, and it was all-consuming. It was hard to think of other things besides this. But hindsight has given me the ability to look back over this short period of time and see what I was distracted by, what actually mattered, and what investments lasted. So what if we lived our lives in hindsight? But the moment that we're looking back from is the moment that we stand before God, where we're standing before the throne of God in heaven. What if that's the moment that we're starting from and we look back at our lives? So the way it would work for me is I'm standing before God in heaven, I'm looking at him on the throne, and I'm thinking of what I was like when I was 33, living in Fairfield. What would I think about the way I'm valuing things now? I want to do something else with you guys. Close your eyes again. I'm going to read Revelation 4. Revelation 4 is a passage that describes the throne room of God and what it's like to stand there before him. So I want to help paint a picture of what that moment's going to be like. Because we're going to go there right now. We're going to go to the future, and then we're going to look back in hindsight at our lives right now. So keep those eyes closed. This is a description from Revelation 4. Here we go. Picture this in your heads. There before me was a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. And the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and ruby. A rainbow that shone like an emerald encircled the throne. Surrounding the throne were 24 other thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. They were dressed in white and had golden crowns on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumbles and peals of thunder. In front of the throne, 7 lamps were blazing. These are the 7 spirits of God. Also in the front of the throne, there was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. Keep your eyes closed. There you stand before this throne. There's lightning flashing all around you and thunder making the ground shake. And you feel the weight of his magnificent glory and these millions of years you have ahead of you with Jesus and very few years behind. How do you look back in hindsight at the time on earth? Do the things that you ascribed high value to hold up in the moment where you stand before this throne? What late night anxieties do you hold? What late night anxieties hold the same weight that they do in this moment? Was the sacrifice that you made to obtain the specific car or clothes, or the sacrifice that you made to obtain this relationship worth it? What would you have done differently? Now that you've gained all this wisdom through the perspective of hindsight, what choices do you wish you made back when you were at Sanctuary, back when you were in Fairfield? All right, open your eyes. Francis Chan says, Satan is trying to bombard you with temporary issues. He's trying to make you love things that don't last. How's he doing? Some investments are eternal. You may be in the middle of deep longing for a relationship or the hopes to one day be married. And the pain you're in right now is making focusing on anything else extremely difficult. What would it look like to honor and love God first in this time in your life? What would it look like to honor and love God first in your singleness? From the hindsight of heaven, what eternal investments can you be making? Investing in the eternal, I made a couple things that last forever. Short list again, just like the list from before. It's not all inclusive. I just have a couple things that pop up in my head. The things that you can invest in that will last forever. Number one, your relationship with Jesus. It goes on for eternity. Number two, developing yourself, like humility, empathy, perseverance, the heart of a servant, joy, patience. Those things will all follow you to heaven. Grow your talents and abilities to serve the community or God. We're not just gonna be up in heaven sitting around doing nothing. We're gonna be praising God. Our inner self goes to heaven. Disciple a new believer. That new believer will go to heaven too. Those things last forever. And for those of you who aren't struggling with this deep longing for a relationship, keeping that hindsight from heaven, how does that change your perspective on what your current priorities are? How do you think you'd look back from the throne room? Not with an attitude of judgment, but of kindness and grace for yourself. What would you be pointing to as the area that you wish you spent more time investing in? And what's the greatest investment you've ever made in hindsight of eternity? We honor God when we set our focus on the eternal. Last passage for the last point I want to make. This is a story original to Jesus. Jesus made the story up. You may have heard it before. Here we go. We're going to read it. It's a Jesus original. Again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. He then left on his trip. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant who, with 2 bags of silver, also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more. The master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. The servant who had received 2 bags of silver came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more. The master said, well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount. Now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. Then the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I'd lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back. But the master replied, you wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops where I didn't plant and gathered crops where I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. Then he ordered, take the money from the servant, give it to the one with the 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have in abundance. But from those who do nothing, even with what little they have, taken away. Now throw this useless servant in the outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That ends really intense. Last point, we honor God by thriving in this season. In this passage, it talks about bags of silver. I grew up with a version of the Bible that used talents. You guys may have heard talents before, right? So talents are a weight of value of silver. it represents 20 years of wages. 20 years of work is 1 talent. You've been given a treasure worth a significant amount of time. And you may not be super pumped with the value of this season that you've been given, but be faithful. Being single isn't the same as being given 1 talent. What if being single was God giving you 5 talents? Be the servant who created 200 years worth of value in a short season. Invest in what you've been entrusted with. This is the season you're in, whether you chose it or not. What if the way you invested this season turned your short time of singleness into 200 years of value for the kingdom of God? I'm gonna say it again. What if the way you invested in this season turned your short time of singleness into 200 years of value for the kingdom of God? Your season of value isn't the next season, it's this season. It's right now. And you've been given as many talents as a single person that you're going to bring into a relationship. God has given you many talents, incredible value for this current season. Don't wait for some special season to begin investing. Invest now in what the Lord has given you. Be faithful to this season and celebrate with God. When he says, enter into the joy of the Lord, that's what other versions say. Enter into the joy of the Lord. Be faithful, receive the praise. If you're faithful with what God's given you, he's gonna say, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of the Lord and celebrate with God. And the thing about seasons, we're seeing this right now. No matter how much you love summer, seasons never stay. Seasons always change. Thrive in the season where you've been entrusted with the weight of much value because it's going to change. We honor God by thriving in this season. Being single is incredibly difficult. It's painful and it's hard to navigate. In all the challenges that lay ahead of you, remember this one thing. Your goal as a single person is to honor God well above everything else. Honor God first. And we honor God when we're cautious with our friendships with the opposite sex. We honor God when we set our focus on the eternal, and we honor God by thriving in this season. I pray that you'd be able to see the goodness of God in your friendships, in the way that you overcome challenges in your day-to-day, and by thriving among the blessing of this season. And may you look back from the throne room and see the investments made in your single season pay off in eternity. Let me pray for us. God, singleness is just another challenge. We saw how messy dating was. Singleness is no different. It's messy and it's hard. God, would you give us wisdom on how to honor you in our singleness and how to love you and worship you the way you want to, be loved and worshiped. And God, would you show us the different parts of our lives right now where we are spinning our wheels in an investment that has no lasting qualities and no lasting value? Would you give us the eyes to see those things that are eternal? And God, I pray that we would see that weight of value that you've given us for this season. That we're not just wasting our time. God, you have a special plan for us in this season, if it's singleness or whatever it is, God. Would you show us the way? In your name, Jesus, amen.